I'll start with Grandpa Martin, my father. He was born in 1890, September 8th, 1890. Right, 1890. And he came to this country as a baby. He wasn't a year and a half old. He came out in January 1892. He was just over a year old. And his mother came out to stay with her brother on the farm down outside of Fall River. My mother came out 3 times.
Came out from where?
From Azores, St. Michael's, the Azores. And my mother was born on May 24th, 1895. She came out 3 times before she finally stayed here. The family used to go back and forth. Her father used to sell cotton cattle out in the Azores. They'd come out and work at the mills for a while, then they'd get lonesome, they'd go back. And she came back for the last time after her father died. Her father died when she was 14 years old. Shortly afterwards, her mother came out to stay. She brought out my mother and the 2 youngest, which were boys, John and Alec. And they came out and stayed with a sister, and they worked in the mills. Then
In the Fall
River Mills. Then Grandma, they lived with a sister, her mom's sister. And then they set up housekeeping themselves, the mother and the 2 boys, and my mother was the youngest of 5 girls. Then her mother wanted to go back. So she knew if she went back, she'd never come back because her father was gone. And she and my father decided to elope. He took her over to his aunt and uncle in Swansea, to the farm, and left her there. They had the banns done. The mother could not talk her back home because, according to her wedding certificate, she was 5 years older than she really was because she'd been gone to work on her sister's working cards. So that's on her wedding certificate. My mother was 22 when she was only 17.
And how old did you need to be to get married?
21 at that time, without the parents' permission.
Oh.
So that's how, and she stayed with them until the banns were read. And he had to borrow money, mind you, to buy her wedding outfit and so forth. He borrowed it from his godfather. And she
And that's
was
their wedding
still
picture?
That's the picture right here of the 2 of them. And that wedding was January 13, 1913, which is an anniversary coming up. So, and they lived.
What was his name?
Frank Martin and Frank Mellow Martin. And they lived with his mother and stepfather and family. He was the oldest. There was other children, but her father, second stepfather. And they lived with them for a year and a half. And they set up their housekeeping. And my brother Frank was born in, when my mother was 19. Just before her birthday. She was 19 on the 24th of May, and Frank was born May 18. And they had 3 children, and I was the middle child. And I have a brother, Dave, who was younger. That takes care of this side of the family.
So when you said they went back and forth, they went by ship?
By ship.
How long did that trip take?
Oh, it used to take a long while. When my father came out, it took over 6 weeks.
Oh.
Right, and he never knew his country. He never went back. He never knew. But my mother did. She traveled back and forth 3 times, and she never went back till, what was the year she went back? It was after I was married. She went back and spent 6 weeks out there. And they'd had a wonderful time. Yeah.
So if they would go, if it took 6 weeks by ship, how long would they stay?
They would stay, they'd work a while, get money, and then they began to get, miss the country. And they'd decide to go back. They'd go back, and then they'd live there a while, and they'd think, well, gee, we could be making money here. And back they'd come, because they had 5 girls and 2 boys, and the 2 boys were the youngest. And that was surviving children. She also lost some. So,
wait, great-grandma had 5.
my great-grandmother, my mother's mother, had all of those children.
How many
My
did she
mother
have?
only had 7 living children.
Wow.
But I know that one time when they were here, she lost a child at birth, was stillborn. So there would have been a bigger family. And,
So she came across on the ship with all those kids.
oh yes, and she'd always be, they used to have to pack everything for food because the ship food was terrible. They used to pack everything they could with them, bring out. And the mother and father used to be so sick, seasick, they used to have to take care of themselves. They were in tight quarters too. They didn't come out first class.
5 or 6 weeks and bring all your own food?
Well, all that they can, it'd be things that they could keep.
Did they leave from Lisbon?
No, that was from the Azores. St. Michael's on the islands of the Azores. Islands consist of 9 islands, and they are beautiful. Very much like Hawaii.
So and they were both from there.
Both from there. My father was from Britannia, which is Brittany in English, and my mother was from Fleet in the St. Michael's, which was just outside of Punta Delgada, not too far. You can take a bus to beautiful, beautiful islands. I've been on 5 of the islands. So.
And when they arrived here, did they arrive in Fall River and stay in that area?
They always stayed in Fall River, and it was the mills. They used to work in the mills. My father became a weaver. He used to be an insurance agent. When I was born, he was an insurance agent, but then he was in a hit-and-run accident. And he was laid up for 14 months with a broken leg. And then he had to go back to the mills. And during I have pictures of him, during World War II, he had the 2 children, World War I. During that war, he was the boss of the inspection cloth. And I have pictures of him, and he was in charge of that department. And after the war, there was a man, in fact he was superintendent of the mill, wanted him to go to California with the family. And my grandmother would not let him go. He fussed so much. She was going to never see him again and all that. And he did. Well, my life would have been so different if we'd gone. And he became a weaver later on. So, in Fall River. So we moved to Attleboro in 1927, in July, simply because the mills were going downhill. The Depression was beginning, the cotton was going out and down. And we came to Attleboro in July 1927. And he worked for Mossberg Press. That was a firm that used to make all the tools for the Ford cars at that time. And my mother worked in Wolfenton, which was a wool dyeing place in Attleboro. And I entered the 6th grade at the age of 10. I was very fortunate I had gone to kindergarten. I was, at my age, it's unusual to have people that have gone to kindergarten. And I was 10 years old.
So how old were you when you moved here?
I was 10.
10 when you moved here.
I moved in July and I entered the Tiffany School fall, September.
Where did you live when you were in Fall River?
Lived at 40, I think it's 43 Crescent Street.
Is it still there?
What?
Is it still there?
Yes, it was a Decker. Well, we owned that Decker, but we sold it a year and a half before because Dave was so sickly. We spent so much money on him that they lost the house. They had to sell.
Mm.
And we lived in the first floor when we owned the house, but people liked us so much, Mr. and Mrs. Eames, they insisted we stay, so we moved up on the second floor. And I used to deliver lunches for her for a quarter a week. And it was 4 lunches, mind you, 4 lunches. And they never used, the mills were always fenced in. And you had to be able to do the 4, I used to have to climb one fence. And I would stand on the low rung, put the pails up on the crossbar on the top, climb over, get them down, deliver those in there. Then I had
Who were
to
you
cut
delivering them to?
the woman that had family that had bought the house.
But who were you delivering the lunches to?
She had 2 sons and a daughter and a husband who lived in the mills.
Oh.
I worked in the mills. And so that was what I used to do in my nooner. But that was because I didn't have time to wait. They'd open the gate up just before they released the people. They wouldn't get away with that today. And then I'd have to go back to this mill back here. And to be able to get everything done, I had to climb that fence.
I remember great-grandma telling me a story about a little girl that was sick. She was ill and was living with you for a while.
Listen, I had my cousin Mary, I hadn't seen in all of 60 years. I was at a wake 2 weeks ago. I lost my cousin Mary Pius with Alzheimer's. This was 3 weeks ago. And who was there was her sister-in-law, her husband's sister. She married a second cousin, and both of them cousins to me. And Mary lived with us for about 6 years when I was a little girl. She her mother had died, and her father died, buried 3 times. And she was with us in between. She was 6 years with us.
Mm.
And before she...
That must have been who she was talking about.
And her brother Manuel, died in our home. He was only 13 years old.
Oh.
But he had, after the war, World War I, you know, there was an awful lot of, the flu killed an awful lot of people, you know. And this boy was left very weak, and he died of something, I don't know what, in our home. He just took care of people at that time. So, I was born during the war. My father had the flu and was okay, but he had a sister who had the flu, but she never was right after that. So I saw her after all these years.
Wow.
She had married, and it was everything. She turned to his side of the family because there's, you know.
Yeah.
So they never got together. I felt very bad because I think my mother would have liked to have seen her, you know.
Yeah.
So one of those things.
So you started to say this was this side of the family.
Right. Now the other side of the family. Oh, Grandpa Pineo was born February 20th, 1913, the year Grandma was married, my mother. His mother and father both came from Nova Scotia. She was Rita Coffin. She married a Coffin. And her father was Bradley Coffin. No, Bradley Barclay. No, it's Barclay Coffin. And she never met Grandpa down there. She met him after she arrived here. He came down with his family, his mother and father was Arthur Pineo and Abigail Pineo. Came to Attleboro with 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls.
That was Grampy's family?
That was Grampy's family.
Wow.
And the oldest boy was Emery, who later became my father-in-law. Emery Sr. was the oldest boy. There was Emery, there was Aunt Dora, there was Milton, there was Avett, there was Bernard, Dora, the oldest one was Orenda, and she had twins and she had triplets.
Wow.
There was Aunt Love, the youngest girl was Aunt Love, that was her name, Aunt Love, and Aunt Grace. That was the 8 children that came out. And Grandpa married Rita Pineo, and she was living in Providence at the time. I've got a card where he'd gone visiting her before they were married, and when he came back by trolley and sent her a card to tell them he arrived safe. And, I don't know in what year they were married, because Grandpa had a sister Beatrice. Rita and Emery Sr. had 3 children. Beatrice, Grampy, your grandfather, my husband, and Virginia, Rita Virginia, the one that's my age.
So when they moved from Nova Scotia to this area, where did they come to Edinburgh?
Well, they came to Attleboro, and she was a very well-known seamstress, and she used to do tailoring, and also hats. She was used to decorate hats and make hats.
Why did they leave Nova Scotia?
Again, you had no, you see, everything was commercial. You went whether you could get a job and a living. Nova Scotia was just fishing. Grandpa remembers when he was a young man, your great-grandfather used to do lumbering in the winter. And he used to work for fishermen sometimes during the summer. And great-grandma Pineo came from Scott's Bay in Nova Scotia, and Grandpa Pineo came from Bloomington. And it's just over the hill. They never met till then.
Till they moved here.
Right. And how did I meet Grandpa?
Yeah.
He was going to Wentworth Institute at the time, Wentworth College in Boston, and I was going to high school. And I used to pick up, I lived on Thatcher Street, and I used to stop at the house, and Jim and I would walk to high school together.
Jen is
My
your Grampy's
sister-in-law,
sister?
his sister, Virginia, and we would walk to the high school. Well, when it came for Christmas vacations and so forth, he was always home. And he was always there talking to me. I'll tell you about what he did to me one time. He was 5 years older than me. Can you imagine? You know how one Christmas, the 3 of us were in the living room talking. And this was we had stopped on the way home from school. And Jen had been planned between them. She says, something about some magazine that was on the radiator in the front hall. So I went over to the radiator to look at it. While I was there, I was under the mistletoe. That's the first kiss Grandpa did.
He tricked you.
It was cute. So he used to be waiting for me when he'd have school vacation, but we didn't. So that's how we started going out. we used to have to walk everywhere. And the first time Grandma Martin saw him, it was a snowstorm, and I'd gone to school. I was in high school, and they had one of those old-fashioned sleds, flyers. And she looked out, and here's Grandpa coming down with me. It was laying at the sled, and he was running down Thatcher Street. I used to like that. You had a dry but another Christmas he did, one before while we were dating, he says to me, he says, the night before Christmas we're going to, you've got to go over and pick up a guest. And I was invited for dinner the next day for Christmas. And he says, do you mind if we go pick up the guests for Christmas? I says, oh no, I don't mind. So I got into the car, and I says, when you pick your guest up, I'll get in the back seat. You two can talk. He says, oh no, that won't be necessary. He says, he's very quiet. He won't talk too much. Fine. So we pulled up to the Mansfield into a farm. He went in, come out with a package. It was a goose. He completely voted. Mr. Gander.
So did he sit in the back
Mr.
seat?
Gander.
This is your wedding picture.
Yeah. That's the wedding picture.
I like this one too.
He graduated from Wentworth, and of course there was no jobs. There was absolutely no jobs. He worked for his father. In fact, he put himself through college with doing floor jobs, floor sanding.
Oh really?
Yeah, they were the only floor sanders at
I
that
didn't know
time.
that.
Way back.
Is that how Uncle Em learned?
Yes, that's how Uncle Em learned from his father, and how Brandon and learned from them. And
And it's a picture of your family.
right.
That's Uncle Frank, and that's
Uncle Dave.
Dave.
Yeah.
Who's everyone else?
That's my father and mother,
Jeremy.
and my two brothers and I.
It's a good picture.
That was our family.
What year was that taken, roughly?
That was taken in 1938.
So how old were you in that
The
picture?
year before I was married.
And where was that?
That was out here in this yard.
Looks like roses.
That there was.
Did you have
That was a rose harbor.
Put up that other wedding picture, Sherry. No, leave that one there. Just hold that one up for a second.
That was taken out here. You can see the garden. See the,
Oh, it was taken right here?
Right. That was taken right out.
Where
by
did
the
you get
front.
married?
Here. I got married at St. John's. But I had to get married in a rectory because Grandpa was not Catholic and I was. And my father was so angry, we almost turned Episcopalian. If it was for my mother, she was one that stopped him. Oh, he was so determined because he couldn't understand why we, at that time, it was a terrible thing. I had to get married in a rectory. Now they go up in the altar if they're Jewish, whatever. It's strange. He just was, he gave the priest an awful time. His only daughter. And my mother cooked the wedding at that time. See, during the Depression it was pretty tough. That's why we stayed, because they asked us to stay, because they needed help themselves.
Your parents?
My parents, my father wasn't feeling well already. And at that wedding, your great-grandfather Arthur Pineo and great-grandpa Senior, all of those were here. All those generations. Arthur Pineo, the original ones that came down from Nova Scotia, was here at the wedding. And Grandma Pineo, Abby, wasn't here because she had fallen down the cellar stairs and broken her leg.
Ooh.
So my wedding bouquet, we had our pictures taken at the studio, and we went to see her, and I left her my wedding bouquet for her, so she'd feel
was
as
a
if
part of it.
right, she was proud of it. And we went for our honeymoon. We went up to New Hampshire to the Willie House Cabins, which was run by his uncle, and they gave us all the time we were there. They wouldn't take anything.
Oh, really?
That was their wedding gift to us.
That's nice.
We stayed at Willie House Cabins,
Which town were they in?
and that's up in Crawford Notch.
On the White Mountains?
It's still there, the Willie House, and that's where there was a land avalanche, and the house stayed, but people had gone into shelter and they had died.
Ooh.
That was years and years ago. And from Nova Scotia, we went across Vermont to into New York State, went down across to Niagara Falls, across Pennsylvania to Wyalusing Rock, highest point in Pennsylvania, Wyalusing Rock. We had a flat tire at the top.
What kind of car were you in?
What?
What kind of car were you in for that?
In old
Sure.
place, we didn't have a car when we got married. We borrowed Grandpa's car, and we came back with $100 in our pockets, and we were rich. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Money was, that's how. When I got married, I was making $15 a week. And the girls, I was in charge of an office, and the girls underneath me made $13 a week. I was making $2 more than they were in charge of the office, which was perpetual, where they bought the stock for Swank, the men's jewelry.
Oh.
And
When you say you came back with $100,
but
you mean you made $100 on the way, or you left with more than $100?
that was what was left, because at that time $5 was a fortune. And we came back with that because we came back a week earlier than we had. We were going to plan to stay 2 weeks away, but we got robbed in Jersey City.
Oh.
We went to the World's Fair. We went down through Pennsylvania to Jersey City. We stayed in Jersey City. And while we were there, the big, I used to know the name of the hotel, was the big one. We were led, a young Negro, a boy, and led us, told us how to park in back of the hotel. Oh God, they didn't have any parking, and we did find out the next day. Well, we went to the World's Fair, and when we got back, I went up to the room, and Grandpa went out to check the car. And then he didn't show up. I finally called the desk, and he was down there. We'd been robbed. The car had been broken into. All the gifts, all our film was gone. And the simply reason was because at that time, the film used to come wrapped in tinfoil, and they used to wrap it back into tinfoil. They thought it was new film. They took all our
All
film.
your pictures from the trip.
Because we were on the, all our trip, of ourselves, went on the Maid of the Mist, and in Niagara Falls. There was an Englishman that took our picture for us, and we had, I cried, I was so upset, and we left the next day, and we were going to come up through Connecticut, which we did, and to stop to see his cousin, who was a Rowell, his cousin Rowell Crocker, was a minister down in Connecticut. We stopped to see them, but we came home. That's why we had the money left. So after we were home about 3 weeks, Grandpa Pineo bought us a car. He gave it to us as a wedding gift. But it wasn't a new one, it was a second-hand car. And that's how we had a car.
So then you came back and you were in this house.
Yes, and I stayed always with it until 1946. We were out looking for a place to stay. And I already had the 2 children. You know my bedroom upstairs?
Yeah.
Where the bed is, that was us. I had the twin bed where the vanity is there. And the crib for Emery at the foot of the bed. That's what Emery used to be there. And we were looking for a place to live. Now, my father was terrible. And what happened was, we were at the theater. Dave come home from the war in January. My father was, you could tell it was I had him on special diets for his heart condition. But with him home, we were going to set up housekeeping ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
On the Sunday night, we were at the theater, at the Old Bed Theater, and Grandpa bent over. He was in such pain he couldn't sit straight. He couldn't even drive home. Dave drove home. It was just the 3 of us. We spent the night with the doctor here all night. Ended up taking him to the hospital in the morning, and it was gallstone.
Mm-hmm.
Floated out of gallbladder into the cystic duct. So he got operated on. And we almost lost him. Good thing I had him in private care. I had a private nurse in, and I had just left him. And I got home, and we checked the children, because I never had to have a babysitter, because my mother was here. And I get the call from the doctor. He was in a very bad way. I went back up. He had suffered shock.
Mm-hmm.
They put on top of that, we pulled through, they put the intravenous in wrong. It was going into the arm muscles. Today, you could use soap. He couldn't work. He wasn't supposed to work for 6 months. It ended up he didn't work for 3 months because of his arm. He could only lift it up so far. And of course, with his job, he had to. So at the end of 3 months, he was fine. He went to work. But I lost my father. He came out of the hospital 1 month to the day my father. They found him in the school basement with a heart attack.
Oh.
And took him to the hospital, and within 2 days he was gone. So then I couldn't leave my mother. So that's how it all went with
How old was your father at that time?
54 years old. So but he'd had high blood pressure all his life, and they didn't know what to do with high blood pressure at the time. Though the doctor told me I had kept him alive 5 years longer because I used to make special foods for him. I used to make a carrot soup, imagine carrots and stuff. But during the war we did all our preserving. We had our garden, we lived off the land here completely.
Really?
All completely.
Animals too?
Animals too. We bred a pig. She had 7 little ones, piglets. We had goats. We had cows. We had everything right here. We were self-sufficient completely. Potatoes, everything. So I didn't go. I had it. With Grampy not working 3 months, I didn't go into debt. We survived very nicely. In fact, we bought a brand new car. The first time in our life, we bought a brand new car that year.
What kind of car?
That was a Studebaker. Studebaker.
What year?
Oh, I don't know what it was.
How much did it cost?
It was brand new. I have no idea what it costs. Yeah. It just was, that's the first time we ever bought a new car. And that was without going into debt. You know, I had it, because we used to work completely self-sufficient. And we used to deliver eggs. My father had a chicken business here. It was just wonderful. And we did very, very well. Used to deliver anywhere from 15 to 20 hens every weekend to customers during the war. People with particular death because rationing was them. It was wonderful. So that's what helped my mother and father. No deaths when he died. It was wonderful. So I didn't work when the children were small, once I had the children. But that year, I was shuffling them in and out of the hospital between Grampy and my father. Dave had his tonsils out in August. He was allergic to aspargum. They told him to chew aspargum. He became, I had to feed him through a glass tube for a week. He just got so wrong. My mother had 2 operations. I was shuffling people in and out of the hospital that year. So after that, when came Christmas, I said to Dad, Grandpa, you know, I think I'll go work Wednesday night and Saturdays. I can make a little extra. So I did. Well,
where was that?
At London store. They liked me so much they made me stay after Christmas holiday. So I stayed. I'd work on Wednesday nights. Then they asked me to be a buyer. I was their buyer for women's accessories. And I did it because Grandma was home, recuperating from operations. I wasn't about to let other people take care of my children.
Yeah.
And I stayed with it until Grandma wanted to go back to work, because she was a young woman. She was 5 years younger than my father, too. And so when she went back to work, that's when I decided I was going to quit my job. I gave them a notice. And the last buying trip, I went into Boston to hotel, what's that? Hotel Parker House, to meet the Van Mall salesman in there. On the way home, who was on the train? Mrs. Fine. She was in charge of the cafeterias then. She asked me, and I knew her because of our PTA association. And I told her, she wondered how I was doing. I said, well, I'm going to quit my job. I said, this is the last buying trip I'm doing. And I said, I'm going to quit my job. I don't know what I'm going to do. So she says, well, I'm going to open Peter Thatcher cafeteria at Peter Thatcher New School, opening up. That was in 1951. Are you interested? I says, I might be. That's how it came about. About 3 weeks before September, I called her after I'd left completely, because I left at the end of July. I called her, I says, yes, I am interested. Because then I could work and the children would be all right.
Yeah.
They'd be in school.
Yeah, because you'd have school hours.
So that's how I started in the school system, was when Peter Thatcher opened up in 1951.
And how long were you in the school system? When did you retire?
I retired 31 years later. I worked 12 years for the cafeteria, and you know, that's strange how that happened too, because 1963, when your mother got married, your father was going into Air Force. And they got married, and she was going to go out to a month later, after he got settled in. Well, while they were on their honeymoon in Nova Scotia, they got home. The President Kennedy signed into law, married men did not have to go. That was the weekend your mother got married. So because I didn't know about it. So he decided, he went to Boston and said, changed his going in, because he was going to go immediately a week later, to the first of the year. See, he was going to go into the first instead of, and they'd have at least a few months together. Meanwhile, your mother gets pregnant, so it comes to the first of the year, he didn't go at all. So that's how it come. So that he needed, when he decided to stay, he needed a resume. And at that time, you didn't have copiers the way you have now. You type them up and you with carbon. So I wanted carbon, and I didn't want to buy a box of 100. So I went upstairs to the office and asked if they had any black carbon. No, they had the blue. And I didn't want the blue because it would look like carbon. And so Bill Glennon, who was a custodian who had worked with me, and Mr. Thomas, who was then superintendent, I had worked with him 8 years. He was principal at Willett. That's again, it's fantastic time. Had become superintendent. So he says, you call the old goat. They'll have some black ones up the office. So I did. I called Mr. Thomas, and the superintendent of school. And I called him, Mr. Thomas, do you have black carbon up there? I need some black carbon to type up a resume for him. He knew of Jimmy's wedding. And he says, Mary, you type? I says, yes, I do. Wow, that got the wheels turning. He came down shortly afterwards, wanted me to transfer up to the superintendent's office to take Hilda LaPalm's job. She was retiring from the school department. So he talked to me. I said, well, Mr. Thomas, I don't know, I haven't done any office. He says, Mary, I know what you can do. You took care of the counts up in the cafeteria. So he knew I could do it. And I talked to the family. He says, oh, go for it. I was beginning to feel, the stuff was heavy.
Yeah.
So I did. That's how I happened to go up and get transferred. Day after Christmas, 1963, I started in. I only worked with her 4 days, and she retired.
4 days, that's all you had?
4 days, and I had all of the warrants to do. At that time, the accounts were kept on a calendar year basis. Why she was quitting was because the state had put into law that the reporting to the state had to be done on a fiscal year basis from July to June, and it had to be under their coded system. So she wasn't about to get into all of that. She left.
She didn't stick around to train you either.
She left, and I was left to pick up the pieces. And I had to keep records on a calendar year basis for the city of Attleboro, on a coded and a fiscal year basis for the state. I had to go back and code the last 6 months of 63 bills in the code for the state. I'll never forget. I did it every piecemeal, every chance I had. I'll never forget Mr. Thomas coming up in the middle of January and says, Mary, I've got to tell you, we've got to start in on that. And I said, I've got it done. He says, you have what? I've got it done. Mm-hmm. He nearly flipped. So that was it. And they finally changed the system so that the city now, they also ended up taking it on the coded system, but that took a good 5 years. And also on a fiscal year basis. So the records was just the one record would be color both. But meanwhile, it had to be kept both ways. It had to come out to the penny. and prepare those warrants. There used to be the sheets with 20 columns. So one thing led to another. And then his secretary, a few years later, retired. That's when he asked me to be his secretary.
So you never had to look for a job.
I never had to look at top end. Every one of the jobs I started, I always ended up on the top end. I went from the lowest at the school department, cafeteria helper, to secretary to superintendent. Oh, it's strange. Even in the cafeteria, I was only in there 2 years. The end of the second year, she asked me to be the cafeteria manager over to Finberg. So I went over there for a year. And that's when they were putting, the following year, they were putting the cafeteria to Willett. And Mr. Thomas, who was then principal, the one I'm talking about, was very much against it. And she talked to me and she said, Mary, I'm worried. She says, who I'm going to put there. Please, won't you take him?
Yeah.
So I did, and I told the women that worked with me, I says, from that door out, it's Mr. Thomas's business. From that door in, it's mine. We don't cross. Well, that man had lunch with us every blessed day, and he came for coffee break every morning. And look how it ended up. I ended up to being his secretary all the way up. Hey, I think I've said enough, don't you?
Let's take a tea break.
On and on. I could tell you one story after another.
Well, let's just fill in a couple blanks here. So you were there 31 years.
Yes, 31 years.
So you retired from there in 1982?
82.
And how old were you then?
The day I retired, the then superintendent was Mr. Coelho, died, dropped dead that night, 2.5 hours after he left me. That I'll never understand. I'll never understand. He was in his 40s. He was about 47 years old.
How long had he been the superintendent at that point?
He had been, it's 12 years. 12 years. Yeah. See, what happened with him, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Coelho was a teacher at Bliss, and Mr. Thomas liked him. And when I transferred from Willett to Brennan, Mr. Thomas had asked me that February before. He says, Mary, I am going to be principal of Brennan School. He was being transferred from Willett to Brennan because the high school, Brennan was the high school. The new high school was built, and they were moving out. See? And he asked Bob, he asked me to take over the cafeteria. He says, be one less place I have to worry. I know what you can do. You can handle that cafeteria. And he took me over in February, and he says, anything that it will need to be done during the summer, you let me know. And we went over, and of course that started everybody buzzing because they knew something was up. And so I did. I accepted the job to going over there. He also had Mr. Coelho as going to be his assistant principal at Brennan, when that became Brennan that fall. Came that summer, a month in August, Mr. Thomas was appointed superintendent. Now he knew I had Wednesdays off from the summer job that I had working camp. He called me. He says, Mary, are you still going to take it? I says, of course, it doesn't matter to me. So I congratulated him for becoming superintendent. So Bob Coelho became assistant principal in name only until he was finally appointed principal of Brennan. And he was there until federal projects came in, federal grants. ESEA Title II was the first one, and then there was Title I that came in. That's when they moved Bob Coelho up from principal to assistant with Mr. Thomas. He became assistant to him, and while I was up there at the superintendent's office. That was on Sanford Street. And that went on until Mr. Thomas retired, and then Bob took over. And he was 12 years after he died. A terrible, terrible thing. I'll never forget that. I got that call at 12:30 at night. He took me, his wife and he took me out to dinner down to a place in Providence that's where you leave the car at the door. I got the royal treatment. When we got back to the office, I had packed all my things because I let him know that fall before that when that budget was taken, I was leaving. That's why it was April 2nd, and the budget had been passed by the school committee. It was in the mayor's hands and in the council's hands, all copies, and I left on the 2nd. We went to dinner, we got back to the office, and I was going in for my box, but we sat there and just talked. We talked for the longest while in the car. He says, "Mary, don't come in. I'll go get it." He went and get the box because he knew I was going to run into all the girls saying goodbye. God, that night he dropped dead like that. Crazy, 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 crazy thing. I can't understand it. When I got that call, the assistant superintendent at the time, Bart O'Connor, called me, told me. And he wanted me to go down and see Bob's wife. I says, "Bart, I've gone through this. I know what happens. Everybody congregates. You go. If you need me, if I can be any help, I'll come down. But if I can't be," I couldn't see going down and good.
Yeah.
Oh, what a terrible. I would have understood it if it was me. I'll never forget that. He saw me. Oh, I have this picture. I had Mr. Cole's picture here. A young man. This is a mansion. And he had gone into the office when he left me, and he made arrangements for that tray, my tray that I got, and they were going to have a party for me at the country club. And shortly after he's gone. Unreal.
So you retired from the school system.
1982, April 2nd, 1982.
Was that supposed to be a final retirement?
Yes, yes. And I was, and I found it very hard. Good thing I was golfing, because that helped. And Lucille was still working, and we used to, she'd call me up, wanted to meet me at the club, we'd go. And she was in the same position where she was alone. And sometimes we'd stop and eat, if you felt like it. If not, we'd just go each our own way, and so forth. And it was just wonderful. Until 8 years ago, Nancy Stephen called me. The bookkeeper had left her, stranded without, it just walked out on her, and wouldn't come back. Would I please help till they found someone? Well, I'm still there. You're still there. And I love it. computer. And you know, strange, because I had gotten the computer. We squeezed money out of the previous year, last year, a budget to buy computers, one for the electronics department and one for his office. And he and I were the only ones going to use it. But there was an Apple. And at that time, they were supposed to be able to do accounts, because that's what we wanted it for. You couldn't put accounts, there wasn't programmed for it. So it was after that. So,
Let's have a tea break.
yeah,
Okay?
you want something to eat? I have a beautiful steak. Excuse me. I could tell you so many stories on the sea were.
Okay, that was just the practice.
Ah, good.
That was the rehearsal. Now we're gonna do it for real.
Oh no! What are you gonna do? Spaghetti!
Good.
What do you want? Just that root cellar, the way that root cellar was, and everything. We used to have our own carrots down there, beets, everything. Squash.
So how many total acres? How much land did you have here?
We had just over an acre. Wasn't that very much? See, but that was all garden there, and that it was beautiful. We had all there to these trees. That was all here. The river was 16 feet. They've been pulled closer to us. And I used to have the big three-story barn there. And the chickens were kept there. And we used to have the sluice way behind. And that's where we used to have the animals. We had a little shed over here. That's where we had cows. It used to be where we used to have the little chicks. But then during the war we had cows.
So what year did they build that highway?
Oh, jeez. I couldn't tell you. But we took the, we went to court with the bond bit, because we knew they didn't need it for the highway. And all we wanted to let them do was leave us alone. And of course we didn't expect. We got $3,300 for that bond, and it cost us $1,100. It cost 30% of it goes to the water. And no, now we lost the garage, we lost the barn, we lost land, lost the water rights. Absolutely ridiculous. If it just been a few more years, that would have been ecology. It worked for us, because they did not need that land. Our bond is underneath that land.
They just bulldoze it over, or did they cart it away?
They just took them.
So it's buried out there somewhere?
buried out there. And what went down in that barn? The brass beds. Was in there. That was again before it became so popular. The old fireplace that originally was here, the framework, was out there. There's an oil painting that went down with the garage door that had never been used. Went down with it. See, that barn at one time had been used as a nail factory. And also up the second floor was cartons of glass jewels, but they were made out of glass, they were precious. And what it was, they were large. And all I could figure, and Ginny was the one that figured that out, was that it belonged to the circus animals, decorations that stones they put on circus animals. Kids used to love to get up in that barn. Some of the hat pins that I have there came from there too. History. We moved into this house in 1936. The year after I graduated from high school. And the house we lived in, my husband and his father built us. My father. We lost that house because again, the Depression. A man could not get a job. It was cheaper to have women do jobs during the Depression. My mother even did polishing.
Polishing of what?
Jewelry. Where they got something's dull and you polish it. And that wasn't because of the Depression. She did that during the war when there weren't any men around to do it. That's what started this country. The women decided that they could go ahead and work. They could work during the war, they could work after. State one. So, this house, 1936 year it is. God, 61 years.
So what are some of the changes you did to this house since you've been here?
Oh my, well, when my father, of course my father, and brother Frank did some work when we first moved in. The first thing we did was put a bathroom. Wasn't the bathroom in? Right there used to be the old sink and it was a hand pump. Because it used to be well water. And then Frank got married and we got married a year later. And then when my father died, of course Emmy took over a lot of doing. And when my father died, we added up the bedroom, all of this, and the porch. To make the house big, because it only used to be only 2 bedrooms. It's of course, and my mother took the downstairs bedroom when the children was older. And then she moved back up when they were gone. And we've always had the same bedroom. It made all the difference in the world. My mother lived to 85 years old.
What year did she die?
My mother died in 1980. Henry died February 27, 1979. She died May 27, 1980. 50 years and not that. Sherry, let's set the table here.
Well, finished lunch, dinner, whatever we had there. Combination breakfast for me.
Just filled up, that's all.
So, I mean, you've got pretty unique perspective. You've been in the same house for 61 years. And how long you been in this town?
61 years. Me.
So you've been in this house since you've been in this town?
Since 19, no. We came to Attleboro in 1927, and we lived on Thatcher Street in an apartment, and then we moved to another apartment a year later. It was a little bigger on Birch Street, 72 Birch Street. Then my father had a house built by my father-in-law, who was, I didn't know was going to be my father-in-law at that time. And we lived in that house for 3 years. And then we lost it because of the Depression. Because when we bought this.
So being here all this time, what's the biggest change that you've seen that's had an effect on your life?
The biggest change was when I lost my husband. I had never been alone. That was the biggest change. It was the conditions of the house, the barn, and the barn was taken and ending up living between two highways with a clover leaf behind me. That was hard to take.
How about what are the biggest changes you've seen in the world and society that you think is just a real big difference from when you first got here?
I'd have to give that some thought. I have to think about that. There's so many changes, so many people on the go all the time. Haven't got time, you know. They're just, everyone's on a rat race, actually. They just go. We used to have a lot more time. It's,
You see a difference with that, huh?
right.
So why is that? What is up with this rat race?
Everyone having to have everything that everybody else has. That's why they live for now and not the, it's now. Now. I want everything now. There's so many things.
So we asked my grandfather that question, and he answered pretty quick, wasn't it, Shirley? And it was kind of surprising. His answer was the amount of money that kids have today.
Oh, how true. How true. You didn't have, I never ever thought of children having a weekly stipend. That was unheard of. Unheard of. For heaven's sakes, when I got married, I still put in my full wages into the house. And I got married on what I earned on overtime. And I was working 12 hours a day to do it. But my regular 40-hour pay came in because the family had to have it. And this is what kids today, they get married, they don't pay board to their family, no. They have the money right along. It's strange. No, everything went in. The family was the whole thing and what was needed for the house. And it was absolutely necessary. That's why when we got married, we stayed here because my father and mother couldn't afford to lose me, and he wasn't feeling well. He was he had the heart problem already.
He talked about when they were kids, they did not wear shoes from April until October.
Oh, I was fortunately, I always did, and my brothers. But my mother's sister had 2 boys and 3 girls. They used to go barefoot, yes. The minute the weather warmed up, they went barefoot. And those shoes that they had were the ones they put on the following fall. Whether they fit or not, They weren't. That's right. And the clothes he used to put on a dress, he used to just hang on them.
So he said, when we were a kid, we'd have a nickel. We could decide whether, I forget how much he said it was. He could buy an all-day sucker. I don't know, maybe it was a penny. He says, but if you bought that all-day sucker, yeah, you'd have that today, but then you'd have nothing afterwards.
That's right.
So
That's right.
we didn't spend the money, and but he immediately came up with that answer that kids, and I think he's talking, young children having money, having access to the money. That was his answer to that question, unrehearsed.
Well, I'll also tell you about Christmas. Christmas, a child used to get one thing. One. And usually it was because the family got together and got it. An aunt or a godmother. You didn't see, I think it's awful, the amount of stuff kids get today. It's unreal. You walk into a house and it's toys from one end of the house to the other. Never heard of such a thing. To me, it's terrible. It's not good because they grow up wanting everything. They have everything, and they take it as a way of life that they're always going to have everything. You don't. No, I agree. Your father did a good job. He said it very well, and you learn to share. Oh, you just did without. If you couldn't afford, and another thing, if you couldn't afford something, you did without. You didn't go out buy with a credit card. Whoever heard of such a thing? When you used to get 2%, 2 cents on the dollar for the whole year in a bank, you thought you were getting rich. That's how it used to be.
He talks about the changes in population too, just how much cities have grown and all that too, which is kind of interesting.
What?
He just talked about how he'd seen just the population grow and how it's changed, like the city where he grew up and in Philadelphia where he lives, just how he's seen it change so much.
Changes.
And I mean, most of the stuff that you get a lot of answers from people, are technology things. And when you mentioned you had to type up a resume and you wanted to get the black carbon paper.
Because it looked.
So I was trying to remember, before computers, but, I typed term papers and hand typed a resume. But at least you had a photocopier that you could duplicate it with.
Oh, and a typewriter that had a corrective key. That was the biggest invention there was. Because you'd have to go every copy. You had to lift up the carbon and erase it. But you never got it back in the right place no matter what you did. It was so hard.
But now you even think about like a fax machine.
Oh,
it wasn't that long ago that it was pretty much a novelty for a company to have a fax machine, and now
you have them at home.
You have them at home, and you almost can't live without it.
Exactly.
The woman who was just here, the architect, she says, "Oh, should I mail you the proposal or fax it?" We're like, "Fax it. We need to see it right now.
Right.
It better be waiting
and
for us."
everything is now. See what I'm saying? Everything is now.
Right. You have Federal Express. No matter what you send, it has to get there the next day. If you don't fax it, you have to overnight it.
Well, even last night, I was so darn upset. I had no paper yesterday. And
Newspaper?
It didn't come, so I called up the circulation department in Attleboro, and they told me I'd have it. I waited an hour and a half, no paper. I called. At first it rang, so I got back to the main switchboard again. I says, I spoke to circulation an hour and a half ago. I still haven't received my paper. Well, and I says, I'd like to know the reason why. Is there a reason that the paper isn't here? It'd be fine. I never did get an answer. It was here this morning with a regular Saturday morning paper. And that makes me angry. But again, you see, now.
So
I want
you
an
wanted
answer.
it faxed to you. Well, fax it to me. If you can't
Yeah,
deliver
you see
it.
what I mean? No big deal having the paper missing, but I was upset about it.
And then now we have email,
Right?
and you can send messages, we can send files, and
That is all. I'm lost in that. We're
So
on
am I.
email at work, and I don't know anything about it as yet. We're just beginning.
so even see some of the stuff that you don't probably use, and I'm still not totally in the swing of it, but if you wanted a catalog for something, like let's say you wanted the LL Bean catalog, well, you could get on the internet and it's all online, and you could get it, you could print out those pages if you have a printer. So if you wanted it, and normally you'd have to call, and if they hadn't had your name already and sent you one every other day, then you would have to wait for that. We did
You want it
research.
now.
We did research on these post and beam houses, and before, when I did this 12 years ago, I got the catalog, and then I sent for more information. That came. It was, weeks and weeks and months of process, and instead, I thought of it, got on the internet, came down with a pile of papers, and everyone was just amazed. But that's how we need this stuff now.
That's right. That's right. It's now. Even everyone they come at you. They want an answer. No. Strange. No, it is. Everything is so much faster today. What I don't like is getting away from the personal touch in purchasing. I hate them all. But you know something? A lot of people are hating them. You know what's going to be big is the catalog business. Because people are turning to catalogs because of it. They're just so damn tired of the malls. The push, 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 push. At least you sit down to a catalog, you get what you want right in front of you. And Lindsay did a lot of shopping by catalog this year. Ginny did a lot of shopping by catalog. I did so myself. And that's 3 people that ordinarily don't do it. Am I taking your time?
Nope.
No, that's
That's good. Well, that was our final
Thanks,
question to fit in there.
Oh,
Thanks.
well, you're welcome. I hope I gave you information.
It's just interesting.
There's just no end of stuff that you could, when you think about it. Oh, how you had to be at the right place at the right time for a job. Came out of high school, no one could get a job unless you knew somebody.
Mm.
The factory, people would order their friends, they'd hire them. And the year at Thanksgiving, 1935, to have Thanksgiving, work Thanksgiving Day, then have 2 hours for lunch, supposedly lunch, and come back, and then get laid off, the whole crew laid off on the Saturday morning. That to me is unforgivable.
Mm.
I've never been near that shop at all.
Hmm.
That was awful. But that's the way it was. You just had to be at the right place.